Howdy everyone, my name is Grace Snow. I'm a 19-year-old sociology major student at Texas A&M University, and I grew up as a Christian. When I think about death, I don't really focus on what happens to my body or even what happens after I die, because for me, life and eternal life are not about what's next for me personally. They're more about how I live now and how I love now and the kind of impact that I leave on the people around me. As a Korean American, my culture doesn't shape my views on death that much because I've seen how traditional Korean customs place importance on rituals and ancestry, bloodline, and I never felt strongly tied to those practices before because for me, simplicity matters so much more. Because if anything, I want my death to be cost effective and still meaningful to those that I leave behind. And I care more about how my passing might bring others together in service than about any tradition centered on me. So whenever I think about what happens to my body, I honestly don't see it as something to preserve, and I would like my body to be donated for medical education or research because I place no importance on what happens to it physically, because what matters to me is how it might help others. And if my body could help a medical student practice or help a scientist make a discovery that saves someone else's life, that's how I want to serve even after I'm gone. And that's the legacy that I do want to leave. If possible, I want my body to go to a local medical school, and my family lives in Houston, so it would make sense to arrange it through a program at UT Health. And I'd also like my organs to be donated if that's a possibility before or after or in place of body donation process if it's too complicated. And as a Christian, I believe that God calls us to love our neighbors not only in our lifetime, but also in how we prepare for what comes after. Because in Matthew 25, Jesus says, whatever you did for me, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. And that's the kind of death that I want. I want to be giving in my death and also serving in my death. And this idea connects back to Professor Hernandez's lecture about Christian funerals. Because in the Think, Pair, Share, we talked about how Christian view of death is less about the body and more about the resurrection community and continuing God's work. And my body is not the end if it's a mean to glorify even in my death. And I trust that my family would carry out these wishes, even if it's inconvenient or kind of costly, because I know that they know my heart, and this would be the choice that would reflect the person I was trying to be for my whole life. And I want my funeral to be at a United Methodist Church, hopefully my church in College Station or my dad's church, but it doesn't matter that much. And more importantly, I want it to be active and not just sitting, crying, or remembering, but serving. I imagine a service day where local nonprofit organizations would host projects and people who come to remember me also get to serve together. And I would assume that it happens at a church gym where we would have a super short memorial service with hymns and prayers. And then we're going to have volunteer events like right afterwards. And because I've been so involved in local nonprofits that I know like many would be so interested in just continuing to do what they do, but at my funeral. For example, I was involved in PB and Joy, and that's where students would make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches every single Friday, and we would donate them to a local homeless shelter, or we would make plastic sleeping bags with plastic bags, and then we could do that at my funeral, and I'm sure that they would be happy to do that in order to honor what God had for me for my whole life. And I don't want my funeral to focus on my death, but I want it to focus on how God used my life, and I want the service to celebrate what God can work through even the smallest acts of love. And I was also inspired by what we learned about through New Orleans jazz funerals, how they mix mourning with celebration and grief with gratitude. Because it's not about sad goodbyes, but more of a testimony of how my life continues through community. And I love that blend of joy and remembrance. On my service day, people could write letters to their loved ones, plant trees, serve food, or pack meals for families overseas or in this country. And I know it sounds simple or complicated, or I know it sounds complicated logistics-wise, but I've been doing those for my whole life, so I have everything planned. I just need to contact people, and I do have people who would contact them in my place if I do die. And I just want people to be reminded that love doesn't stop when a person dies. And I want people who attend would leave feeling inspired to continue serving others. And maybe some people would think that I love people and that they want to love others like that too. And that's the kind of memory that I want to leave. And Professor Hernandez talked about how funerals can be manipulated for profit and how the industry is a billion-dollar industry, and that just turns grief into businesses. And that lecture really made me think about how I don't want my family to feel that pressure, and I want them to feel peace and simplicity instead of financial stress. Because death should never be about showing wealth or status, but it should be about love, and I want that for my funeral and about my death. But I would like a pasta bar after the service and also a Kahoot game about me during that pasta bar luncheon or dinner. On the practical side, I plan to have a simple will instead of a living trust, because from what we learned in class, wills are cheaper and easier to manage, especially for someone like me who doesn't own much yet. And I named my sister and my future husband as executors because they're the two people that I trust most. My sister knows my heart and she knows me. And my future husband, I haven't met yet, but whoever it would be, I'm sure that he would care about what I want and truly love me. And all my printed documents are in a singular folder in my closet, and my legal documents and passwords are on my MacBook, and my account information in my Google Sheets. And I'll just tell my sister and my parents where everything is, but I'm not gonna let them have full access to it, and I'm gonna make sure to organize it before I die. And in the lecture about payable and death, I liked how my money could be just transferred. I want my money to be transferred to my sister right away. And I don't really care that much about the money part, but I just don't want people to stress about it, especially my family. And I'm sure that they're not going to fight over it because they all have other values that matter so much to them. And with the people that I interviewed, I noticed that Luke talked more about life after death and just about the funeral processes more than Abigail. And it sounded like Abigail didn't really want to talk about it with their family too much because it might scare them. And I think that just makes so much sense, especially if she came from a smaller town. And I feel like this whole topic about death is just so unspoken and they're so taboo to talk about. So we do have a general idea, but then we don't plan that much anyway. And I hope that when I'm gone, my loved ones don't dwell in my absence, but also feel the peace in knowing that my life was just full of service, and even in the small ways, I hope that they remember that I didn't care about material things or status, but about living faithfully and loving people well.